Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon panel. We'll talk a lot more about citizen inclusion, citizen solutions, listen to a lot of examples this afternoon. Before that, my name is Emmanuel, and I work at the University of Copenhagen. I'm a social scientist by training, very, very far away from anything to doing with designing technology, but we work with people who design technology and see how that can support people and what we can learn through that process. So thank you so much to the Engage team for inviting me to be part of this event and to moderate this discussion. I work also on another project with my colleague here, Nathan, who leads the Links project, and I lead the component on disaster governance as part of that project, where we try and investigate how we can use social media and crowdsourcing in disaster risk management. Before I give the word to our four panelists, yes, we figured we're not the most gender-friendly panel. We apologize. I promise you that didn't happen by design. I think it goes without saying that citizens have always responded to disasters even before any of us get there. That's not new for generations, right? So citizens' involvement, we've used the word first responders for a long time. Now we say citizen inclusion within the formal institutions. There's a lot of knowledge. And I think it's important to distinguish also between citizen solutions as we probably engage with a lot of them now. There is a vast amount of indigenous knowledge sitting within local communities on how they have dealt with these kind of hazards, disasters, questions of climate change, land, agriculture, fisheries, name it. So there's a lot of learning that's sort of left behind within that because it's not termed as scientific knowledge, right? So there seems to be a gap between the two bodies of knowledge. We speak a lot about the formal, the informal. I think it's important to remember there's a lot of invisible ways of how we govern disasters. That's about social cohesion, solidarity, how people respond, the memories with which people react and respond to disasters. All of this becomes a substantial part of disaster learning. All of this becomes a substantial part of how the formal and the informal comes to being within disaster governance. We're talking about citizen inclusion, we're talking about community-driven solutions. Let's also remember that communities are not homogeneous. I live in Copenhagen now. I lived in India for most of my life, but we assume when we use the word community, a good friend within disaster studies, Terry Cannon, would say communities are meant to be heterogeneous. So when we think of the word community, we think we work with a certain homogeneous group of people. Unfortunately, that's not true. And so it is in most of European societies as well. So how can we think of the word community and we talk of solutions beyond sort of looking at it within the homogeneous terms and definitions? And that obviously is a very changing and dynamic aspect of disasters. And I think it would be interesting to engage in questions of what does participation actually mean for these solutions. When does a citizen solution, when can it be truly called a citizen solution? And what's the difference between the formal and sort of the citizen solution? There's a number of examples on the Engage website on sort of the fisher folk from India and some other examples as well. And there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of work done, particularly on participation, citizen-driven initiatives, bottom-up approaches in the Global South. If we look at the work of disaster studies and climate change adaptation for about last 40, 50 years, there's massive experiences coming from the Global South as well. So I think we need to take a step and look beyond the borders and beyond the continent as well for some of these examples. I'll stop here for now and give the word to our panelists. We do not have presentations, so we'll try and speak for about 7-8 minutes each, and then open up for a conversation and for more questions from the floor. To open, we have Jan. Jan is the Deputy Director and a postdoc at the Chaire Géopolitique du Risque, École Normale Supérieure in France. I hope I said that right. Over to you, Jan. Thanks.
Thank you. So I will try to be brief and punchy so we can engage in an interesting discussion. And I relate immediately back to what you said. So we're speaking about citizen-driven initiatives, informal solution, as we called it in Engage. And of course, we can use different terms which come each with a certain burden, theoretical but also practical one. We can speak in a very classical approach in disaster studies of emerging groups. We can speak of informal disaster governance or informal crisis management with more political science, political sociology perspective. We can speak about solidarity networks with a proper sociological perspective. We can speak in a complex systems perspective about self-organization, again, slightly different. We can speak about community response to disaster with more an anthropological heritage. And of course, we can take the perspective of the emergency professionals themselves and speak about unaffiliated or spontaneous volunteers. So there are different ways to circumvent the question. And of course, we can stress rather the actors, or we can stress, well, the solutions, what they do. And this has all the implications. What we did, I think, and we try to do in Engage is to think those terms to a certain extent together and try to relate to them in this growing perspectives and literatures and participate or at least signal a paradigm shift. We are moving, and has been said this morning, we are moving slowly away from a perspective that speaks of populations as passive actors, receiving orders and behaving accordingly or not. And we are moving towards the notion of mobilizing society, mobilizing populations, engaging them, a perspective in which individuals and social groups become actors, have agency. In other words, we're getting rid lately, after, well, let's say 20, 30 years, of this very persistent disaster myth that populations panic in a very large sense, that they are unorganized, not capable of substantial contributions, and a problem to be dealt with. We have gone a long way in changing this perspective, showing that citizens are indeed unified, cohesive, and altruistic, pro-social, when responding to a disaster. But maybe for our perspective, most importantly, and I think this is also the very point Engage's contribution can be situated, citizens are highly organized. Organized as civil society organizations, organized by civil society organizations that linked to disaster preparedness or management, or those who are not. Ripsime did stress this element. So we also have a lot of different associations in society who are not directly dealing with crisis, but which are highly relevant for dealing with them. And we have, of course, individuals and spontaneous groups that emerge, that are not necessarily existent beforehand as civil society organizations. They are there, and we showed this towards different of our outputs in Engage, before the disaster arrived, classically, but also, and less classically, and less often cited, afterwards, and even less when professionals do not come, and even almost invisible, well, during the whole operation, because most of the actions they do are invisible indeed, and even if we can try to highlight some, most of them will remain invisible. A simple call, it could be somebody who's removing a blockage of an access way and nobody notices. So there's so many actions that we have not in our view. What we tried to do a little bit by taking one historical case study, Utah terror attack in Norway, was, for example, Engage to map in a holistic way everybody we can find who did something, to understand all the different contributions who play out and make decisive actions in the sense that they prefigure what professionals do afterwards, where wounded are treated, for example, where the emergency center will be, which was not an official decision, but was made by, in inverted commas, regular citizens. As part of our model on societal resilience in Engage, and as part of the lessons learned, the white paper you will find over there, and of course of the catalog, Engage has shown that citizen-driven initiatives are, first of all, context sensitive. They are bound to local knowledge, and citizens are by their very nature embedded in the social configurations that produce and mitigate crisis. They do not need to be tailored to a specific situations. They are the situation. So a different, very different type of solution than what formally is done and planned beforehand. This enables citizens to make decisions that affect overall disaster management, indeed, and they are also transversal. They are not bound by a division of labor of a pre-organized, planned professional disaster management. They touch every type of disaster, and they can also quickly adapt if the type of disaster is changing. If we think we are in a wildfire, but then we have problems of provisions, because the wildfire goes on. What we showed, for example, in the case of the Swedish wildfires in 2018 inside Engage. They are also using what they do in their daily lives to inform what they do in exceptional situations, which makes them different from professionals who are specializing on emergencies, so exceptional situations. So they are really much bound from routines and daily processes. They are creative, innovative, and improvising. Some of the solutions in Cadillac are very much stressing on that. Collaborative maps, for example, that bring information together, that adapt dynamically to what is the area in question. They are flexible, they have the capacity to adapt, prepared for the long terms of disaster, because they will always be in place. Even if they come outside, they often stay. And so they can more or better adapt sometimes to a long-term effect, as COVID has shown impressively, than some of the officials and professionals by their very nature. They are knowledgeable, local knowledge indeed, but also specific skills, because, as you have stressed, they are not homogeneous. They are also professionals, but maybe not in that capacity this very same day or this very same situations, but they use their professional knowledge. And in most of the cases we've seen and analyzed in Engage, we can see how professionals in other capacities use their knowledge, use their skills in an exceptional situations. Healthcare professionals, engineers, somebody who knows how to drive a boat, etc. And they're resourceful. They can even mobilize massive resources, as again the Swedish wildfires have shown, where you had whole communities bring together food, housing, clothes, everything which was needed for a longer fight on a fire that takes several months to be overcome. So this is also a way, and I think Engage has contributed to that, to show what works and what does not work. But because, as you have said, Alberto, this morning, this kind of enthusiastic perspective on citizen initiatives does not forget that sometimes, of course, citizens, when they appear, may present a problem for professionals. But they are not the problem. The problem is of relational nature. It is of an unclear relationship between professionals and ordinary people. And this helps us to situate the problem, to see it that way, to better understand it and to better phrase it, not as something because they're there, there consists the problem, but as something that has to be put into question with the role of professionals. They, most of the times, hide a kind of a mystery. Often, if you do interviews, and we did those in Engage with people who speak of concrete situation, you see that behind a complaint about volunteers not finding their place, blocking an access way, you find other types of problems. Not knowing what to do or finding meaningful ways to participate. Asked to participate in disaster management, but not integrated in planning. Unaware of ethical implications, and the last sentence, and problems of trust.
Thank you so much, Jan. Bang on time. Next, we move to Adrian. And Adrian is the deputy of the National Training Center in Extrication and Emergency Medicine in Romania.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. Hello to everyone. I'm really glad to be here. And while the discussions of today, I was thinking how far personally I've come since my first participation in Rotterdam. And also I am very grateful for the opportunity that you, my colleagues, gave me, learning that there are some other aspects that we as professionals should take into consideration. Among my activities in the National Training Center in Extrication and Emergency Medicine, I deal also with disaster management, among others. For us in Romania, it's truly simple to imagine working under a centralized system under the General Inspectorate of Emergency Situations belonging to the Ministry of Interior. Having more than 30,000 firefighters in Romania, it's easy to move a group from one region to another. That's why, personally, we stress more our colleagues than the volunteers. But the last period of time put us into some situations, when we realized that volunteers are truly in need. But we will discuss this during our questions in the next hour. Regarding collaboration with the society and the societal resilience, I would like to address that while we think a professional should cover all the aspects of a disaster, for instance, you could find some skills and some material aspects that governmental agency does not have. You could find skills in different regions of your country or of the area you live that you don't have among the professionals. You will have it among the volunteers. But speaking under the legal frame of a professional, working with a volunteer could be sometimes challenging. You need to ensure them safety. You need to ensure them a legal frame of working with you or under your command as a professional. So that might be quite challenging. Yes, I'm very keen to see where the discussion will go. I will have some examples that I will hopefully get to share with you in the next minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Maybe we have a minute for you to give us one example, and then we can go to some of the others later.
I will be gladly. While we talk working with volunteers, for example, a couple of years ago, though snowing in Romania is not as often as back in the days when I was young, there are regions in the mountains where heavy snowfall, actually. And as I said, being a firefighter or a rescue service, you should cover, generally speaking, all the issues that might occur. However, you have highly motivated volunteers, and there was this situation with Club Rescue 4x4, who had the initiative on their social media on that specific region, and they had announced that they are available to offer help for those that are in need, stuck in their cars or people running out of supplies and so on. Since this was happening almost 10 years ago, nowadays we have a nationwide protocol with all the Rescue 4x4 NGOs in Romania. So I think this is a good example of a good collaboration, of an informal initiative going formal.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now we move to... Thanks, Adrian. We move to Stig. Stig is an emergency advisor at Trondelag Fire and Rescue Services. Stig?
Hello, I'm glad to be here with you. It is quite interesting to hear all the questions and solutions. I will speak from a Norwegian perspective and how we use volunteers. The risk handling or emergency handling or preparedness in Norway is based on 3 points. It's the government or public organizations, and of course the emergency services is the one. We have the private companies on the commercial basis, and the third, last but not least, the NGOs, volunteer organizations like Red Cross we heard about earlier today. And we are depending on this cooperation to be able to handle major incidents and other emergencies. And Norway is a quite small country, and we have limited resources, so therefore this is very important to us. But this is organized, it's trained, and it's a part of an organizational plan. But what we discuss a lot here is spontaneous volunteers, and every incident happens in a society, a municipality, or whatever. And the way we are organized, especially in the rural areas, is that we are low on resources and the response time often can be long. So therefore we always, or at least nearly always, will find volunteers on scene when we arrive. Any emergency service have the same problem. And they will start doing anything just because they're at the scene. Many of these are not trained, some are, but we do not implement this in our plans. So this is something we have learned from this Engage solutions. We should organize or at least inform and train the public advanced to incidents. And there is, especially in the urban areas, there are some kind of not trusting the public, not trusting the volunteers, at least not the spontaneous volunteers. But when you get to the rural areas, the first responders are a part of society. They know each other. They know the inhabitants, the spontaneous volunteers. They know their skills, their network, and we see it's a big difference between the rural and the other areas, urban areas, when we come to trusting the volunteers and how we use the volunteers. And we also see that the society is more and more complex, and we also see many new risks, also risk we did not know, like, yes, I forgot the word, but this means that we have several challenges that we're not dimensioned to handle, and therefore we have to have the public to help us. And to do that, the public must take care of their own risk more than we have been used to. We have to increase the risk awareness and the risk handling, the ability to handle your own risk, because the society cannot provide all kind of resources and help all the time. So therefore, we should have some system to bring this knowledge out to the people. And starting in the kindergarten, we have this fire bear in Norway, starting to teach their parents how to check the smoke alarm and so on. And this brings risk awareness into the families. We should have this in schools and of course in the workplaces and so on, because these are the people that will be the spontaneous volunteers in the next time. And we also see that the climate and so on will challenge us. And we have a saying in Norway that it's getting warmer, wilder, and wetter. And this will also mean that we have to rely on volunteers, not the organized alone, but everyone. And the challenge is how to use them, how to organize them, because we don't always know who these volunteers are, what are their motives, what are the skills, and so on. And sometimes they have other goals than the emergency services, or at least other ways to reaching the goal. An example is a search and rescue operation, where the police will be in charge and we will start searching according to certain procedures based on where the one was lost and so on. But we always have someone have their own meaning. We should search in that direction or someone else in another direction. And we had a missing child some weeks ago, which were found dead some days after. And of course, the critic was, why didn't you search in the right area? Of course, probably there were many so-called right areas, but this would not be appropriate because we have to work in a procedure way as long as we don't have any intelligence. And so is it also with the wildfires, where we have many different goals. Some want them to help their property, and they are sometimes able to direct the work in a certain direction, and therefore it's a challenge when you have too much volunteers that not in the same organization as the incident command system. So we rely on the volunteers, but we also see the challenges. And my solution is we should inform better. And maybe we could use the public warning system to go out with a message and what to do. This is of course not in the early phase, but when the working phase of the situation is on, we can ask volunteers to do that, or meet here or meet there, and so on. But in the beginning, they will just act, and we have to consider that when we arrive at the professional services, and how to bring this on and how to organize it on scene.
Thank you. Thanks, Stig. Rob, over to you. Rob is an incident and disaster manager for the city of Giel.
That's correct. And as we are in Belgium, I will, as it is a city in Belgium, I will try to entertain you in the next couple of minutes with the changing perspective here in Belgium on citizen-led initiatives. Changing because before Corona, it was almost non-existent here in emergency management. And if we look at the Belgian legal framework, we like to make laws here, a lot of laws, and everything has to happen within the law. And if we look at the law, citizens are only mentioned as the subjects of rescue operations. And there was one small exception. We have, in almost every city, we have a psychosocial help network. That is a network that helps the first responders in taking care of people who are not injured. Think of the Trondheim exercise, the gym hall in the school. That's something our psychosocial network would take care of. And that's a network that consists of volunteers. And in theory, these could be all just normal citizens. But in reality, 90% of them were social workers working for our local government. So that's past the volunteer thing there, but it works. It kind of works very good. There is a historical reason, I think, why Belgium doesn't have a tradition in citizen-led initiatives like you do have in other countries, like for the colleagues here besides me. Belgian people, they pay a lot of taxes. They do in other countries as well. But we have the feeling that we pay the most taxes in the entire world, and we tend to complain about it a lot. As a consequence, because we pay a lot of taxes, we expect that the government arranges everything for us. Also, when disaster strikes or when the unexpected happens. So people in Belgium don't really feel the need to take initiative for themselves. But then Corona happened. The country went into lockdown, like the entire Europe went into lockdown, and there was shock and awe among our citizens. And it was nice to see that also the first citizen-led initiatives came about, like you had in other countries. We had the grannies making masks for everybody. We got people doing logistics, and even the crown jewel of the Belgian economy pitched in, the Belgian brewers. They start to making their beer into alcohol gel and, and making it around. So that was an eye-opener. Well, at the end of Corona, also the Belgian Red Cross tried to organize these volunteers in a crisis help network. But I think it still exists today, but it's more like a stepping stone into the normal organization there. So it's not a real good example of where we want to go with the citizen-led initiatives. Then another shocking event. There was another shocking event. In July 2021, there was the water bomb and the big flood in the Netherlands, in Germany, and also in the east of Belgium. And the initial and official response was too little and too late. And spontaneous helpers started to fill in the gaps our governments did not fill. People from all over the country came to the Ardennes and helped their fellow countrymen. And this was done in various degrees of organization. There were examples from firefighters from West Flanders who went in a fire truck in their spare time to the Ardennes. But there was also a guy who had an ice cream truck. He filled it up every weekend for 2 months, and he drove to the east to cater for the people who are helping there, and to help the people who are, well, yeah, getting the water out of their houses. So after these events, both the population and the government, for different reasons, I have to admit, are convinced that citizen-led initiatives can help strengthen emergency management and is a big part of a resilient society. So we are starting working on a framework for volunteers in emergency management. It's done for the nation. There is some academic attention. We have a postgraduate in emergency management, and there are 2 people building theses or doing research on citizen-led initiatives. And in December, there is even an inspiration day regarding this subject. And I do not say this with irony, because I think in 2 or 3 years, we have made a lot of progress, mental progress that is, in a short while. And I think it's now time for us to take action.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rob, and I think thanks for sticking to time. And it's very interesting when all of you spoke about citizen solutions and volunteers. And I couldn't help myself from thinking, should authorities, or should these informal solutions, should they be formalized? And is that necessarily, when you bring it into the gamut of the formal, does it lose its value of being the informal, of being completely citizen-led, citizen-driven? That's how it started. And how do we balance that? What does it change as part of a solution, right? I mean, all of these amazing initiatives that came from the grassroots during the pandemic. Are we formalizing them too much, then does it lose all of those aspects that Stig was talking about? Because it is about solidarity, it is about network, it is about this cohesiveness within a certain community. Anybody? Yeah, absolutely.
I can start. I don't think it's possible to organize everyone, because we see, at least in Norway, that people are not keen on being too organized. We see it's a challenge in the football clubs, problem in the Red Cross, and every organization has problem to engaging people because they are so busy on their own. So I don't think the organizing is the way to go. But we also seen that, especially during the pandemic, that something started as a spontaneous volunteer, and they got organized by themselves and offered help to the authorities, and it was an initiative from certain volunteers. But I think, at least in the Norwegian perspective, it's not able to organize everyone because they don't want to be. So I think it's better to let them be unorganized and give them skills.
Thanks, Stig. Does anyone else want to? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Adrian, and then, yeah.
I would like to add also another thing. Firstly, I think that we should separate the idea of volunteering in different aspects. Well, you have the initial volunteer in a huge incident or accident or disaster. You could have other volunteers coming afterwards, so after the first minutes, the first hours, and you have the organized volunteers under the NGO structure and so on. Working with an organized volunteer, it's, from my perspective, at least in Romania, could be very easy. The issue might occur when you are working with spontaneous volunteer after the first minutes or hours of an incident. Well, we are talking here about huge accidents, huge disasters, and so on. I'm not saying that a single act of volunteer should be ignored or so. On the contrary, but we tend to have the idea of working with volunteers when the situation is of a huge impact on a population and so on. Having their informal ideas into the formal part of the institutions, the governmental institutions, could be as simple as that if it works. So if it works, then it's okay. You could formalize it. And you asked before that, well, some people from the society simply don't want to accept an informal being formal, simple because it went under a governmental aspect, and they are not really keen on that.
Thanks for that reflection, Adrian. Jan, you wanted to add something?
Yes, maybe linking to the question of volunteers and some nuance about the term. The term is somehow misleading because volunteering implies that you are really intentionally doing something.
Right.
And what we could see in our historical case studies and Engage, that a lot of those who we spoke to did not necessarily want to help. They feel obliged, they feel pushed, they feel put in the situation where they could not act differently. So this puts terms, and by the way, in European countries, and I think in most countries of the world, we have a legal obligation to help. So we have a legal obligation to volunteer. One could also phrase it like that. So there is already a formalization of any action we do to help some fellow citizens who is next to us and who needs medical assistance. So there is always formalization already there. But to answer your question, well, I would also distinguish between officialize something, so make it appear in official documents, mention it, regulate it maybe. Formalize, so inscribe it in time, codify it, put it in documents. There, I would say, yes, some of the initiatives should be and could be formalized in the sense that they become NGOs or that they become associations and they are existing for years to come. And of course, a lot of them don't need to be formalized and maybe should not be formalized because they lose their creative energy. And some of them, I would even say, need to be invisible, because we have this social background noise, you could say, of millions of actions that constitute disaster. We tend to think about the very explicit one, the ones we have interactions with. But behind those, there are many, 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 many more. And all those would die, probably, if there is too much light on them. So I think to some extent, no, there needs to be a space where spontaneous action can happen, which is not necessarily formalized, not even visible, and not officialized.
I can only agree. Yeah, it's
Thank you.
it's only you formalize when it has added value, and otherwise you leave it alone. And as a government or local or regional, you support it. That's it.
Thanks. We tried to do a typology of social media, sort of people working with social media in disasters, and I think at the very beginning of our project, we realized we have active people, we have passive people, we also have distant people who are not probably part of a certain community, but are engaged in different forms, remittance groups and other groups who are not really visible, but you see the actions being visible rather, right? So I think it's important to remember there are probably a million categories when we talk of citizen solutions and volunteers as well. We have a number of questions, but I did the privilege of being chair and asking the first one. So we'll open the floor if there are more to take some questions, and then we go back to the panel.
Thank you. I agree with you all that we shouldn't formalize the spontaneous volunteers. But in my experience, one see the spontaneous volunteers as resources. You see the work they can do and what they can contribute to. The downside is the cost of the individual. If you don't formalize the spontaneous volunteers, is it a possibility to formalize a system to give them a debrief or a follow-up after they have been in action?
Thanks, Marita. Is that to a specific person? Or is it? No? Okay. Does anyone want to take that and think about it?
Yeah, that's obviously a challenge, because we do not have a very good system to take care of especially the spontaneous volunteers. Organized volunteers usually have a system within their organization, and many times the first responders do the job, leave with the patients or whatever, and the initial volunteers just vanish, go home, and no one will support them. In Norway, we have an app. It's called the 113 app. It's an app to call the emergency services. In Norway, we have 3 emergency numbers, and in this app there are also buttons to contact for people doing first aid. For example, they can talk to someone. How should I feel? What or not what I should feel, but I can talk to someone about what I feel. Maybe you have a lot of questions. Did the patient survive? Did I do the right thing? Maybe you won't know what they did, but you can get some answers at least about what you did, and that will hopefully help you. And you also can be directed to others to help you. And every municipality also have their own psycho team. So it's possible, but if you just go home, you don't have that. But another thing we have in Norway, especially linked to major oil pollution situations at sea, for example, any volunteer except spontaneously should be organized, trained, and also employed by the government or the emergency services, and that is to ensure that they have the insurances, they have their health and something like that, agency taken care of, and so on. So we won't use volunteers that are not organized, and we will employ them actually.
Yeah, maybe a successful example of how to organize volunteers is, I think, if anybody familiar with Team E, the Austrian Red Cross, it exists a couple of years now, and they've organized their volunteers into a central database, and so they are insured, all of them. They can receive training by the local Red Cross teams, and they are put in when there is an incident locally. When it's like in Tyrol, the Red Cross of Tyrol will send a message to all of their volunteers in the database and put them to work. And they do that within that framework. They are followed up. They are insured, and they are trained when needed. Yeah.
Yes, I had a question. It's partly already answered by the question of Marita, but I was wondering about the needs of volunteers, and you already referred to training and insurance. Are there other needs that volunteers have expressed to you, that you respond to, that you adapt to? Maybe some want to be formalized, or other kind of needs that they show they have?
Information. they are also when you like when in Corona, they are also victims of a certain incident or disaster. So they first and foremost they need as much information as they can get, and they're also the most interested party in that. So they are in the middle of the incident, of course. So that would be my first answer. Information.
Yeah. So I had a question building forth on this, because we're talking a lot about supporting the citizens, meeting their needs, but what about them supporting you after the event? So we saw in the questionnaires that we did in the workshops that the citizens feel like after the event, there's no way to provide feedback. And I was wondering, how do you look at learning from these volunteers, spontaneous volunteers, after events, and if there's, I don't know if there's already in place for this in your local situations, or if you just can share something about what is the, how does the local authority look towards the citizens?
Sure, if it's linked, then yeah, we take the question and then there's one question online as well.
Very quickly, we noticed that it's also very difficult to talk with the citizens representing volunteers, and this complicates the question that Laura was saying. I mean, they don't have a face. I mean, if we want to talk with a first responder, we know how to contact a first responder, but if we want to talk with citizens, we really experience this problem in the project. So to have feedback from citizens sounds very difficult.
I will try to answer to this, if I may. In Romania, we have relationships with local authorities, starting from the small level until to the upper level. So, for instance, if a flooding in a small community will occur, then the rescue services will work closely with the local authorities. And under the local authorities, we will have the local volunteers. I hope that will answer your question. Also, on a bigger scale, we have the so-called RED plan. And for the major objectives, risk objectives, we have multiple exercises during 1 year. So we need to touch all the major objectives in an exercise, implying also the local authorities or the county authorities, volunteers, and other authorities that are obliged to answer in that case.
Which was the students. So in these exercises, do you actually collect also feedback from that level?
More or less. But usually we tend to have a supervisor for our volunteers and for the so-called victims. And in a real case, we try to collect feedback also for the patients or from the victims.
So we have a question from online. Dennis asks, are there any examples of citizens having a negative impact on the response to disasters, and how to prevent this?
If not, I will try to give an example as well. I think that the rescue services and the governmental agencies have learned quite a lot with the refugee crisis from Ukraine. While we had organized volunteers groups that really helped the governmental agencies and the rescue services and so on, we also had specific cases in which a single or a small group of volunteers were not truly good intended. So that could be a situations when actually not controlling the work of a volunteer could lead to something very dangerous, such as trafficking and so on, drugs trafficking and so on. Yeah, I think Romania did a great thing with pooling all the NGOs working for the same objective, and not only this, but my colleague Georgia from the SU knows a lot of this information.
I would also like to add something on this matter. Sometimes volunteering is also a matter of branding different NGOs. So it's not always about helping, but in some, well, let's say isolated cases, some of them, they also want to brand themselves. Because, for example, in Romania, we have this public utility status. So if the NGO is involved in different activities, from training to being involved in different disaster management activities, they can also get access to the state budget for different activities. So from this point of view, it's also very challenging, because sometimes you count on different NGOs to support, but sometimes their presence is for some other purposes. Also, once we created the ecosystem of different NGOs in Romania, we also split them in different clusters. So somebody is for the social workers, somebody is for off-road rescue, and so on and so forth. And once we have a specific case and we ask people, okay, could you please support us with your 404 cars? They say, yes, and we are also doing social working, and we also have radio amateurs, and we also have this and this and this. So suddenly they become full of resources that we don't know, just for the matter of being on the scene and being visible. So this is also something that we are working on it in order to see how exactly we can best manage.
Thank you. I'm going to try and push the panel a bit more with another sort of a question. And I think this is all, we've been talking a lot about volunteers, but are there any examples of looking at this, going back to the question on citizen solution, on sort of groups of communities that are volunteer necessarily, like Jan was saying, it could essentially come with a formalization process, but there are probably some initiatives which are very community level, which are very local level, and not necessarily doesn't fall within the volunteer sort of a definition. Do we have any examples of those that comes to your mind, or even from the audience? Yeah.
Well, a very classical example would be religious communities.
Absolutely, sure.
Who bottom-up organize. And by the way, I will use this also to relate to the earlier question, because they're somehow interrelated. A very prominent example of a negative impact is disaster tourism. So where people would go and even organize or even pay for to go to a disaster zone, to crisis zone, to volunteer in order to be branded or to profit in some way from it. And why religious communities or why grassroots organizations are important? Because the very social forces that produce those negative impacts can also mitigate and even prevent the very same negative impact. So when we think about negative impact, the idea is, okay, so we shouldn't work with those, or we should block them, but you can also work with society in order to prevent them, in order to delegitimize them, in order to produce ethical consideration. Don't do this. This is not the norm here. You can't come here. So the social forces, the social actors, the informal actors can also be a help in order to prevent negative impact of citizens that do not act the way we want to, for example, disaster tourists.
Thanks, Jan. We have 3 minutes left, and I'd ask the panel to give us one takeaway or one lesson that we want to take away on informal solutions and how we move forward. Rob, do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe another example from Belgium. The city of Mechelen is also trying to incorporate volunteers into their emergency management framework. And they are trying to do it with a middle solution. That means they are training certain people within the local authority who are trained in logistics, or trained in catering, or trained in collecting people, or so on. And in the next step, they are searching for volunteers. They will get a database, and it's the people who are trained who are going to manage them. So maybe this could be the best of both worlds, between formalization and grassroots initiatives, but we'll have to see.
Thank you. Jan?
Yeah, two terms I would say. Recognition. So it's not about officializing, formalizing, it's about recognizing. And your earlier question about cost, Marita, I think it's a very relevant one. But speaking about recognition, a lot of times we can use what already exists and oriented slightly differently towards society, towards citizens, protocols, the way you come to a place. And the second term would be broadening the scope, and this goes in the direction of what Ripsime presented this morning, the idea that you can, for example, beforehand meet all these social actors and create interdependencies by just meeting, but just recognizing them, by who is in place. And not only civil security agencies, but everybody who is organized in society. And just meeting them, which does not necessarily produce a little bit of extra time, but not necessarily extra cost.
Thanks, Jan. Stig?
I do not think I have a very good answer to that. But I think, again, the municipality and the local society is the key here to not necessarily organize, but having some kind of informal gathering, taking care of each other, finding a common goal, because this is not only about emergencies. There are many kind of situations where it's not urgent, but we rely on the public to help us. We have slides, closing roads, taking weeks to restore, and a local community is blocked, and they have to help each other, and it just happens. They find each other, they know the skills, they know who has food, who has generators, and all this, and it's just happening because it's solidarity and so on. But when it comes to life-threatening situations in Norway, we have an obligation by law to help with the skills you have, of course, but we are obliged to do that. It's not something you do voluntarily. You have to. You can actually be punished if you don't do it. So many of these volunteers are not always volunteers. They just happen to be in the wrong place in the wrong time and have to help.
Thank you, Stig. Adrian?
Yeah, in my work, I was working with lots of volunteers, starting from a small group, like gathering toys in Christmas for the local children's hospitals, or working with big groups of volunteers or associations in the northern border of Romania, in the Siret border, being responsible with transportation of refugees to different centers, train station, airports, and so on. So yeah, I've seen people that are really in need, small children with a single mother, covered in blankets and seeking for help. And I've also seen suspicious acts of volunteering. What I would like to share with you and to keep in mind is don't formalize an idea if it's take away the empathy. So if that formalization takes away the empathy, it's not a good idea.
Thank you so much, Adrian. That's a lovely ending to this panel. I just want to say thank you to the panel again for joining us, and to our audience online and here in the room for a lovely engagement. Over to you, Matthieu and Alexandra.
Super. Excellent. Thank you very much. That was great. So I have a number of panelists to invite. So Effie, Cecilia, Nathan. Yes, I will. And I'll just plug very quickly. Who am I missing? Yes, Hipsime, Rakere.
We can also just stand, right? Yes, we've been sitting for.
I think, yeah, I think you can be a bit. Don't leave me alone like this. No, it's you can bring a couple here. Okay, or standing, whatever you prefer. Okay. So please, you can go to the Mentimeter. So the first objective of this last session is to first restore the gender balance. I think after this last panel, I think we have success. But more seriously, this is meant really as an open session, an open discussion. And I've invited a number of people to join me, just because they represent different perspectives from research, from the industry, from critical infrastructure industry, from the communication technology industry, from the more like civil society perspective. And so my hope is, rather than long presentations actually from you, is that you help me stir the conversation and react to what happened today. And basically we all discuss what happened today and how to move forward. So low threshold in terms of participation, everybody is invited. We'll use Mentimeter as a way also to collect that. So please go online. And okay, I'll just wait 1 or 2 seconds. And then what I'll do is that I'll show some questions. I ask everybody to answer, and then we will discuss the answers together, right? And you're really leaving me alone on my side here. Okay. All right, the first question. This is a ranking question, okay? So put... and dear panelists, think about these. I hope you can see sufficiently well, and think about this. So basically, it's about the different topics we discussed today, and what you think from your perspective, from your organization's activities, what was particularly relevant, and so rank those solutions, those. Topics. I'll just wait just a minute, and then I'll start to show their answers.
Anticipation.
All right, let's start to see some answers. So, dear panelists, please maybe start with just saying a word about what particular activities you are involved in, and then please answer what's maybe your first or second second.
What did they vote on? Okay. It's interesting. I mean, I can talk from a project perspective. So I said earlier, I'm Nathan. I coordinate the Links project. It's under the same call as the Engage project, but the way that we look at this societal resilience topic is looking at social media, really, and the technological interface between authorities and citizens, and how it can act as a sort of bridging mechanism. And there's obviously a lot of things that came up today that resonate with our project in different ways. I could talk about the catalog of solutions all day, because surprise, Links also made a catalog of solutions. Like a lot of these projects, we make a platform. Ours is really tailored to social media solutions, but we've already talked in past events about really there's some synergies across the solutions themselves. So even the catalogs, where maybe an emergency manager or some other stakeholder might want a solution more generalized or on engaging citizens, and then they want to go to the next step of how do you engage them in risk communication. They could maybe find that through our library, which is more specified. When you did the search today, you saw things like apps come up, and those things I think could really easily be linked to our libraries. We have a technology library, but I won't spend a lot of time on that. I think it was also really nice to see the chat bot from our point of view. I think we're producing right now a policy brief on making information more accessible and looking at material accessibility. Do you have access to technologies, but also physical and sensory accessibility, issues of culture. So seeing that you already have integrated that into your solution with sound and language considerations, and I know that came up I think a few times today, that the community is diverse, so you really have to take into account different different languages and minorities within the community. I think AI can play a really important role there. So it was really nice to see those considerations. I'll also just say I'm really jealous that you managed to integrate AI into your platform in the last few months. That's something where we could have benefited from, but really also congratulations to the Engage project. But one last thing, what I would say is above all that, so that's really nice from a project perspective, how they could have synergies. But I think the thing that comes out of Engage that's most useful for us is actually what everyone else voted on too, the strategies for engaging citizens. Because what's funny is when you start working on a technology kind of oriented project, what you realize is that's just really one tool. It's one piece of the puzzle for connecting authorities and citizens. And it's not the first step. Before you get to that step, you need to have trust with the local communities, and you need to have already engaged them in different ways, and not just the community, I mean different parts of the community. So you really have to use intermediate actors and ambassadors within those communities. And those are terms we saw come up today lots of times, which I think really resonate with Links and obviously with you. So from Links' perspective, I think Engage lays sort of the first steps of how do we really actively engage with the community to build that trust and this relationship. And then we can start talking about risk communication and them accepting the messaging or accepting the technology if it's an app or whatever it is. So for us, from my perspective, that's a really, and I'll stop talking now because it's only an hour-long panel.
Thank you very much. You want to follow up?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks. So I was also very interested in all those strategies. I came here also today to really learn from this project and to see what came out of all your hard work in the last couple of years. From my university, I'm Matthieu Hendricks. I work at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. Apart from that, we are very interested in citizen science. So how can we involve citizens in doing the research we do? How can we be less extractivist? How can we make sure that we collaborate with the people that we study so that the outcomes are theirs and that they are part of that process? So I really came here also to learn from your lessons learned and to also take them to the Global South, because I primarily work in the Global South. So I was very interested in all those strategies and how you've worked on them. What really interests me is effective humanitarian assistance and governmental assistance. So what really makes an impact? What works and why and when? I think that might still be something maybe that I've not seen so much today, but I would love to see how you find out what works and when. Have you studied that? Because awareness raising is part of a very crucial part of behavior, but it doesn't necessarily always lead to behavior. So I'm very interested to learn more from that as well. And maybe there are some reflections in the room that you have done that kind of work as well.
Just as a very quick reply, this is something we try to address, and then you will find some of that information in the catalog. And that was definitely an ambition of the project, to have this sort of like context sensitivity and understand, why a particular solution is successful somewhere. It ended up being very complicated and really much more complicated than what we had imagined, both in terms of analyzing and being able to describe that, and in terms of making it usable through the catalog for somebody to basically pick up this information and use it to adapt or select a solution that is relevant on our also. So, but you will find some of that information.
I fully understand. It's really complex behavior of people in societies is really complex. So I can imagine. Yeah.
Well, okay. I have many things. Well, I think about many things during the day. I discovered all the project and the different issues, and it was very interesting. And I think that there are different ways to engage citizens. So I think that today we talk a lot about volunteers. So I think it's it's part of the citizens, but not all the citizens. And I think that preparedness is very important, but not only for volunteers. citizens. I'm going to talk about an example. When I was very young, I was in Mexico City when it was a very big earthquake in the 1985. And the citizens, we were not prepared for that. The country was not prepared for that, even if it was not the first earthquake, of course. But it was a very traumatic experience, and many things have been done. And in 32 years later, the same day, in 2017, there is another earthquake in Mexico City, very important, and it was a very different way to manage, because the government made a big efforts to prepare the city, and with the local entities, with the schools, with all the society, in order to cope with this kind of situation. So volunteers is an interesting point, but I think it's necessary to have a large point of view, largest point of view. And also for the technological solutions that in which you work, they are very interesting, I think, because communication is a key point in crisis management, and I think it's the one of the most difficult points in crisis management, unfortunately. So I think that the different solutions that you propose are necessary, and they are very interesting for different phases. As I said in the morning, I think that we have to consider different phases in crisis management: the anticipation, the preparation, during and after. But I think that you made a strong hypothesis. I mean that all the citizens have a mobile phone, internet, and maybe it's necessary to consider what happened if we don't have this. So this is something in which we work a lot in EDF, in particular after the Fukushima accident. What happened when we don't have anymore the technology, when we can't communicate how? So I think it's also interesting to consider both. Well, I can say many things, but
thank you. Raquel, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you. This doesn't work. So I'll stick to the question, right? The results that the project has produced are have been directly relevant for our organization, because they have allowed us to adjust an emerging technology to what our products can perform. Obviously, maybe the challenge for industry in general of participating to such projects is that we have a very narrow perspective, which is commercially driven, which is solidly anchored, though, in the reality of demand. So I think the value add that we have brought to the product is that we see what's asked. And in some cases, the academic approach goes beyond what is asked, but sometimes it's not really relevant to what we do. So I think that's really the challenge. But in terms of relevance, I would say that for us, from our perspective, the fifth and the first are the same. For us, technology is a way to engage citizens and bring them to safety in case of critical event. Otherwise, we wouldn't sell our products. That's what we do.
Interesting point, indeed.
Yeah.
And I think it's to me it's interesting to see that it's a ranking, right? So it doesn't mean that this is not relevant. It's a ranking, and I think it probably is a manifestation of maybe the maturity that is lower for what we saw today compared to these other existing solutions that we presented and or discussed. And what I find interesting from a research standpoint is that this is raising a lot of questions also of how to communicate with the public. And I'll stop here.
I know it's working, I think. Thank you. I was delighted to hear everything I heard today, and obviously I'm working in the strategies for engaging citizens, but I'm interested in all of the topics you treated today. And I think the last roundtable here was very significant, because you had an overview of all these topics, but for me, and it's the role and the place of the citizen in the societies. It could become a project of society and not something technical or something which is out of our everyday life. And this is the most challenging thing, to how we can make this topic something obvious, something which is a part of our routine, as said Jan, or you said also, you described how it's challenging to involve citizens as a stranger in the scene. But we are involved naturally because it's happening for us, for human beings. So for me, there is a challenge to work on the status and on the role of the citizen. You said that citizens are paying taxes in Europe, and we made a survey when I was a European project manager in the French Red Cross. In 2005, we made a survey asking to people if they are ready to play a role. And at that time, they said, we are paying a lot of taxes. Why should we do something? That's true. But how can we make this subject different, and how can we bring citizens to play a legitimate role? This is for me the most big challenge. And the second thing is to consider, as you said, not only volunteers, but everybody. And when we are saying volunteers, we obviously think to civil protection. But there are many other ways to volunteering, and we need to work closely with all other parts of the society for the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. For the sake of time, I think I would like to just open to the floor. Are there any comments, any reactions to what you heard that's in line with your thoughts? Yeah, Leila, yeah.
Okay, so just as a lesson learned that I got as a member of the project, and that I have been involved as a research partner, but also very involved in the validation exercises. In our case, for example, in the Spanish case, we had a lot of difficulties to involve citizens because of the topic, but I think that also because sometimes compared to, for example, Trondheim and Italy, I think that we lack an organization which is more citizen-based organization. Like, for example, Maya's organization, which I don't know how to say, Ciudadanitza Activa, yeah, which is directly a citizen-based organization. So having them on board, I think that it really facilitates you to have this connection with the citizen, which is great. And I think that Red Cross also, maybe it's not citizen, it's more volunteers, but let's say that it's very close to the citizens. So I think that if you want to really improve this aspect of how to involve citizens, and if you want them to be part of the of the project. You need this kind of associations or groups, because otherwise it's very difficult to reach them, to involve them. And I think that this is an important, for me, it was a lesson learned also for the future.
Yep, good insight.
Yeah, an anecdote related to the citizen involvement and the taxes, and an anecdote from reality that I have discovered in talking to a mayor in Italy. So to perform certain of the municipal functions that ensured the safety of the municipality, he had enrolled the citizenship by waiving a part of their municipal taxes. So if you volunteered, you were in fact receiving a discount on your taxation rate on the percentage of the municipal tax. And that created an incredible adhesion to the programs and a lot of also of community exchanges. So involvement can also be monetized to attract directly people.
Yes, Marita.
I would like also to share a lesson learned, because you talked about engaging the citizens, and in the Trondheim Red Cross we have worked many years to inform people on what they should have in their homes in case of emergencies, and how to how to take care of themselves, not to be a burden for the official apparatus. We have seen in many years that people looked at us a little bit like the crazy hoarders that I've seen on television, but the changes in politics, the changes in the world's economics, etc., have made people more aware. And I think it's important for us to use that momentous to take the time to inform people even more now, because now they are willing to listen. And when people are willing to listen, it's important to use the time and give them the knowledge they need.
Thank you. In the meantime, I opened up the second question, which is about the obstacles for these the different results or strategies, for example. There are many statements, but it's basically the way the ranking works. The more it's on the right, and the more it's an obstacle from your perspective. So what? Yes. What we've been discussing today, which is that disaster management is not just the responsibility of the formal organizations, the authorities, but actually a entire society issue. That's this whole of society concept that I'm trying to put here.
I can say something to that quickly.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Please.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's falling right where it should, really. Maybe even a little bit more less emphasis. I think that, at least from our experience, yeah, you still have old school, or I shouldn't call that old school, it's just the way it is. You still have command and control thinking, and that has a very specific place in that sector, and it serves a specific purpose. But I mean, still, even we were at the DRMKC event 2 days ago, and you hear panelists, quite high-level panelists, saying things like citizens panic, and they need to behave in disasters, and the indication, I'm paraphrasing, is they need to be controlled somehow.
A very top-down.
Exactly, it's top-down sort of, but I don't think that that's really the general. I think it is shifting a lot. At least we saw that in Links and in the project and in the organizations we worked with, even ones that had never been involved in EU projects or research projects. There's really, it's not out of willingness, there's actually just a need to engage, as we've heard all day today, to engage the society. And it depends where you are, but so I can just tell you from our Danish case study, one of where Emmanuel's based, again, high taxes, high levels of trust in the state and in the institutions, which means we're not doing anything for ourselves. like somebody's going to take care of us. And for the authorities, they're overwhelmed. We can't do everything. We need them to take some measures, both preparation-wise, but also in response to things. So it's overwhelming their capacities. So I guess it speaks also to the second or third one a little bit too, in terms of the resources that they have to engage them. But I think it is shifting, and this is your project, and what you've shown is kind of evidence of that. There's really a willingness to engage, but probably it's difficult to know how to do it, first of all, and it's really difficult to implement anything like that into an organization. We have practitioners here, so maybe they can talk more to that. But I mean, who do you even engage with? Is it the operational people, the strategy people? How do you then implement that into organizational learning and then into change and really into practice? It's a process, and at least for us projects, that's really difficult to even see in 3 years, you know.
Yeah, a quick comment to that, and then I come back to you, Sonia. I think as a having done now research in this project on that idea of whole society, I'm very pleased when I see the Sendai framework, for example, pushing very hard for that kind of vision. But it's true that it's not very clear how it trickles down, right, from that very high-level international framework to the national, and then but it's we see it adopted, right, adopted by the EU, adopted by etc. So it is progressing. That idea is progressing, but implementing concretely remains a challenge, I think, indeed. Sonia.
Yeah, it was interesting to understand during the Engage project that actually a form of training for the citizens is to be involved in emergencies. So actually we need to, I feel that the more we talk, the more it's like a dog that it's biting its, I don't know if it's a saying in English, but because they need to be trained, but then in order to be trained, they need to be involved. And vice versa. So, and actually be involved in the real emergencies, it's one of the best ways to increase the awareness in citizens and also in the first and second responders and the authorities. I was in a training with the firefighters yesterday, and they were saying that their behavior completely changes if it's a simulation or if it's a real emergency, because they don't have the adrenaline component. And this completely changed their level of learning. So even if involving citizens in simulations is a first step, of course, but also try to smooth the process and try to involve them during emergency and use that occasion as a learning in order to be prepared for the next one. So it's like a first step, and I think we should start somewhere, otherwise we keep talking and never doing.
I particularly see the fourth topic, the population is not interested in taking such an active role, as you said. And also because we are expecting a lot of things from the population. Each person is gathering on himself, herself, all the risks. And particularly every year we have a kind of a survey asking to people what is the most important risk you identified. And each year, of course, it's changing. There is one thing which is not changing. This is the health, employment, risks, and poverty. These things are not changing. They are always on the same place. So people are facing a lot of issues. So when we are coming to ask them to do something more, they are saying, look, if you ask them the question, do you want to get involved? They will say yes, because they want to tell you something you are expecting from them. But in the reality, this is very complex, because people are facing a lot of things, and also because the word risk is everywhere on everything. So there is a competition between all these topics, which are always going on the same target, the citizen. So it's up to us also to find a way to this range of things you have done in the project is very interesting, because each organization can take something to complete its own activities, its own tools. So it seems to me very open and very easy to take and to use. So this is for me the most valuable thing you have done.
Just before, just a comment, that what you mentioned makes me think about one of the controversial aspects around societal resilience, and we've had discussions about that, is the risk also of de-responsibilizing the authorities in a function that they are expected to still perform, and putting a lot of that responsibility on the citizens or on the groups of citizens, which is sort of the dark side of the push for that term of resilience, which I like a lot. Apart from that, yeah. So a comment here, and then Emmanuel.
Because I would like a little bit to defend the citizen due to the fact that we are all citizens, right? And when I was invited to the final event of Links, there was a very interesting panel about crowdfunding, right? And in my opinion, this was also a very, very good example how the citizen can take initiative. They can find by themselves funds to carry on this initiative, and they can reach something really, really concrete. And in this way, they play a very, very active role. So I don't know if Nathan wants to add something, but for me it was very, very also interesting because this was another aspect that complements the work that we did in Engage. That we don't deal so much with these other aspects, but this was to me very, very interesting.
Thanks, Matthieu. I think just 2-3 things combined, and I think there's amazing reflections coming. One is, I think, what Matthieu you just referred to, and I've been sitting listening about this since morning. I've been thinking about this, and particularly when and we've spoken about it in our project as well, is sort of this de-responsibilization somehow. And there is a fine line between citizen inclusion, participation in processes versus shifting responsibility. And what that means for, and here we are talking primarily, most of our examples have been within response, incident command systems, sort of civil protection sort of issues. But there is a certain responsibility that comes with risk creation itself in society. And that, for example, happens with the example that from Trondheim, what we were listening this morning about soil not being safe and how then urban development comes. Should we build there? And how do we deal with that? Then how do we deal with that kind of disaster risk, right? Which also goes back to what you were talking about, poverty, inequity, etc. I mean, people are also overwhelmed with their own lives, and our societies are not homogeneous. So there are groups of people who cannot take on this risk as it goes along, because if we address probably all of these issues, they wouldn't have as much of an impact when the disaster strikes. And then the second one is that I think both our projects haven't engaged with this, but I think what's happening with heat waves in Europe, I think is going to open up a number of new questions when it comes to urban design. Who's affected? Where do people live? What do our neighborhoods look like? What does this mean for our healthcare systems? And I think there's a lot more for that to open up as well.
Just maybe it depends also of the topic, as you say, because in France we have a lot of reactors, many nuclear power plants, and in all these regions, there is a kind of engagement of the citizens, and there is a with the local entities, and but there is a social dialogue, and the citizens understand that it's to protect them. So it's it maybe yes, it's I think there is also a relationship with the topic, and in this case there is it's not volunteers, but it's another kind of engagement to know what to do if there is an accident. So it's important also.
Yeah, just open up the last question. regarding the research, which is also from your perspective, what would you have expected or liked to see in a project like Engage that you didn't see or were surprised not to see, and things that could be developed further as a follow-up or. So a couple good. Thank you. Multi-stakeholder coordination. Can the person who wrote that explain what?
Yes, I think I linked to the intervention also of the panelists before session. I think that the point of the engaging of citizen require a coordination, link, a relationship between all the different actors or stakeholders. So I think it can be an interesting point to develop further in practice and from a research point of view.
Thank you.
I think it has not been mentioned yet here, but on the last slide, there was also something about the transferability of all the solutions. I think that is something what you hope for also with the catalog of solutions to make sure that others can be inspired by it and can apply it in a different context. We also know context is very important, and those small differences can be very important for the success of an intervention that you do. For example, maybe in the Netherlands we would not click on a link, but maybe in other countries there would be a certain trust to click on a link. So I think it would be very interesting to also describe, maybe that is already in the catalog.
Yeah, so I
those limitations.
will challenge you.
Okay, I'll check your limitations.
I will send you a few examples because we couldn't do it for all of them, but there are a number of solutions for we try to do that. But I'm not convinced we did it well. So I would be curious to have your perspective on that and tell me whether the kind of information that's provided is the kind of information you would expect to talk about transferability. And
I'm just wondering, why do you think it would be is a success at the moment, or why do you think it is not fully a success yet? So if you have already described that, it is great.
Well, we tried, at least.
Okay.
Okay, so we have more. Yeah, the needs of all different people. I think this is a classic disaster studies or disaster management research issue, and indeed it was not a central topic for Engage. I think other projects of the consortium covered it much better, like Builders, for example, has had a strong focus on vulnerability. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, from my perspective, and this is personal, I think aspects that could be, that the aspects that have been studied and developed is how people react in the existing project. We have looked at different incidents that have happened and we have mapped how people. I think it would be extremely interesting to look into why people. So what are the incentives that are driving citizens? And what are the downsides? And how can those be systematized to study the transferability and ultimately to come up with policy recommendation, cost items, technology suggestions? Thinking at the obstacles, to answer the question before, in my view, the project was very, very broad. And by being so broad, by being so broad and all-encompassing, it's difficult to find then, real indications.
Not broad, you don't get funded.
Well, but then maybe that should be also an element of discussion, right?
I see also one example here, the one that is actually highlighted has the cursor, the role of businesses. I think this is a very interesting one. There's an example I really like about citizen-based initiative, which is the Le Week-end Solidaire in France. You probably know about that. So an association created in the aftermath of Storm Alex in 2 years ago, basically, I believe. Which basically helps reconstructing. So it's somebody, an individual with expertise in logistics, in a large scale cultural events organization, basically created ways to take people, volunteers to the affected areas to help reconstruction. And that basically got very successful. And what happened with success is that businesses came in. For example, the local hardware store, provided material, provided people with the construction competence, etc. So it creates this very virtuous cycle. So the businesses, I think, are an important asset that we didn't touch on in Engage, and that's I agree, it's a gap.
And maybe linked to that also, what kind of behavior is already happening? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that are already happening, and Stieg also highlighted, Adrian also highlighted, there are already a lot of things that are already going on that you can learn from and support and find what they need in their processes. Maybe it's already happening. Maybe they don't need anything from the government.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is exactly what I wanted to highlight. Maybe to know better what is going on really when something is happening. Probably a lot of people are doing a lot of things, but we are not able really to take it in account or to have a clear view of, okay, things are going on in the moment, and after people are leaving the scene, and we don't know what happened exactly, who did what, etc. And what is interesting is all of you were talking about the spontaneous volunteers. People who are not in the scheme of action, scheme of operations. All these people are doing something we don't want really to have under our feet, because they will maybe disturb the operation. But it shows something that we don't really know. This is the will to do something when something is happening. So thank you. Yes, I think it could be very interesting to know a little bit more about that.
Maybe I can add something more.
Sure.
So if you look at behavior, when you look in social science, there are different models that explain behavior, but I think it's about motivation, having the motivation to act, having the ability to act, and also having opportunities to act. And I think a lot of the tools that we've seen today focus on awareness raising, risk awareness, also on the abilities to act. But sometimes people might lack opportunities to act. And I think what a governmental role can be is thinking about how they can facilitate people to act if they already want and can do it.
But I was more the cost of the individual versus the benefit of society. I was thinking about yes, these volunteers as in a professional environment. When people cope with a disaster, with an accident or critical situation, they could have emotional impacts. So yes, I think with volunteers, someone talked, I think in the other panel, about the feedback of the volunteers, and maybe is one of the aspects that it could be explored, the emotional impacts. There's no neutral.
Yeah, I think, and this is actually something that is noted in the research, like in surveys of, and it's our catalog is a reflection of solutions that exist, and indeed this kind of the solutions for learning after involving citizens after events are very rare. So there are some, I'm sure, but they are difficult to find, and there are all kinds of challenges we discussed in doing it.
And maybe it's more difficult than when we are in a professional environment.
Absolutely, exactly. Identified actors, etc. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Good. Any other comment? Yes, Manuel.
No, sorry. Just another question on the table, another view. From my perspective, I work in environmental epidemiology and a lot of about climate change and consequences, especially heat waves. And we cannot forget that a lot of risk about which we have spoken come from climate change, and also the prevention side cannot be forgot, because citizens are victims and also suffer of risk coming from this huge problem. But they themselves can do some more action and some more activism to contrast the cause, the primary cause that is responsible for these hazards. I think we cannot forget also this aspect. And so,
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. And what we are starting to see now more and more, even in the funding calls, as they realize this climate adaptation agenda has to cross over with DRR and other agendas. You're starting to see it in the latest calls. We're starting to see events where they're mixing even the panels at the EU events, where they're putting really climate scientists together with DRR people who've been working in this area for years, preparedness and these actions, adaptation and things of this nature. Emmanuel can talk quite a lot to that too. So I think that we see the movement moving towards that direction. I completely agree. When we were in Toulouse, we also had Beatrice, I can't remember her name, she's the city mayor of Lyon. And it was the same for her. Risk communication is great, but we need a communication campaign that just tells people if you dig up your backyard and then we have rain, you're going to have a flood. Like, you have to take steps to understand also the change in geography and your impact on the environment. So she linked it into more of a systemic discussion than just exactly the full chain of things. And we see that also. We were at the DRMKC, and really their agenda is, one of the other people said, involving actors, involving different stakeholders. Yes, for involving the population, that's one thing, but really for mitigating risk or risk preparedness is to have all these different parts of the system in the same room. So the exercise that Matthieu and I participated in, they essentially gave us a simulated country being flooded and said they need a risk awareness plan to deal with systemic risk. Who needs to be in the room? That's an interesting question coming from the Commission to us. Who should be sitting at the table? It's industrial people. Is it who needs to be at this table? So we see the agenda, I think, moving that way. So I can't agree more.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was along the same line very briefly. I was at a wildfire event yesterday and talking about what they call now integrative wildfire risk management, and that's very much this idea of this full cycle between land management and so building resilient lands, as they would call it, as a way basically to not to provide fuel to fire. So the fire management is thought in a much wider systemic fashion. Yeah.
I think it's also about, and maybe that links to your question, I think the risks that we are facing is also about the place where we choose to live, the way we are living in buildings. I'm an architect, so I come from that perspective, so maybe I'm very biased in that sense. But I think there's a lot of things that we can do in urban planning and really make a difference in limiting a lot of those risks and adapting. There's a lot of risks that we cannot prevent, but we can adapt to many risks. And maybe in the Netherlands that means leaving half of the country, but yeah, those risks are real, yeah.
All right, very good. I have a very last question for you all. Let's talk about potential futures, maybe.
I'm very tempted by this last one.
You can't vote. You can't vote, Rakele. You can choose multiple. Yeah, I mean, this central part of the question is, those projects are a great way to establish a discussion, a collaboration between us with the KICOP and external experts joining us. But what do we do now when it's the end of the project? And what we'll do is we'll contact you again in the month to come. To maybe discuss some more concrete ideas, but I was wondering about potentially some initial thoughts about what we could do together.
Personally, well, not personally, but from Everbridge perspective, we try to put in the presentation in terms of themes for future research what we see would be interesting from our point of view, and then from a policy perspective, I would really like that we sit as a series community and we have a round table, not an event, but really a round table with the programming officers at the European Commission and bring to their attention aspects that we see from the project. That we have 4 knowledge platforms, it's inefficient. That we have, that we have gaps or aspects that could improve their way of working and our effectiveness for a future project.
After everything has been submitted and approved, I guess, or before?
I don't think that that's really, I mean...
After, yeah. No, I don't know. Yeah, I can imagine it.
All right, so what we see, it's interesting. I mean, yes, that network obviously is something that a lot of people are interested in, which is very nice. How to do it is always a very complicated issue. I mean, I've been in that situation in previous projects. How do we maintain that life? I think in a short way to answer that, the easiest is probably to join an existing network from my standpoint, rather than trying to maintain this exact network. There are initiatives that exist. There are projects that are following up. So this cluster that we are participating in, for example, has a number of projects. Paratus also is another project that's part of the cluster that Deep Blue is involved in. And those projects might rely on advisory boards, might rely on networks. That could be opportunities. There's CMINE as a general community. Some of you might be interested in, so you could join CMINE there and learn about the activities of these projects, learn about potential ways to interact with these projects. But it's something that we'll have to definitely think about in these last months, and probably in collaboration with Links and other projects, because it's a common problem to maintain that that dynamic collaboration we found. Yeah. Who just wants to party? I would have thought it's Martina, but she's not here. Oh, here she is. Yeah, there is the possibility of I think publications. Also, this is. I mean, I don't know how it was for Links, but in the life of the project, we are rushing everything and typically not spending enough time on publications, at least for. Yeah, exactly. But it would be interesting to to publish and discuss some of the topics we discussed today. I think could lead very naturally to publications. Yes, Stig?
In my perspective, it would be a waste of time and money just to let this die. Actually. And I also understand that this is a project with a limited time and limited finances, but some of the solutions are made by non-commercial actors. And if, and hopefully when they will have their next version of the solution, an approved version, this should be a part of the solution. And to bear that in mind, this should also be linked to other projects, so they will know that there had been done some work earlier. So the next project don't start on the bottom line, but can bring some of this knowledge further on.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say we are lucky that we have a follow-up project called Synergies starting next month, led by Deep Blue, which will make use of the catalog of solutions to some degree, which will make use also to the results from links and a few other projects like that. So I'm rather confident that the catalog will not die directly, not immediately at least. But yeah, it is an important aspect. You know, there's a lot of work that went into that catalog. With all its flaws, there's still a lot of content and rich content that should be still there for a while. Yeah.
And I also think that the network is as important as the solutions, because this is a way to contact other one, to exchange solutions, experiences, and so on, ask questions. So you should not underestimate the network itself.
Yeah, and I think at the very least, it's very possible to at least create means through whether it's through email or through LinkedIn to maintain a bit of exchange of information on a regular basis, especially when there are activities, events, etc., to at least inform each other, even if they are not necessarily like the same means that we had during the project to involve everybody. Yeah. Sonia? Yeah.
Yeah, related to what Matthieu was saying before, there are some flyers on the table, and there is a QR code to the website of Paratus. And if you go to the website, there is a page called Stakeholder App that it's about to be launched. So you can register on CMine, and I think that's it's not the same, of course, because it's online platform, but still it's a way to stay connected and in touch.
Yeah. And Sticcato, I took your final words like a commitment, because there is another project in which Red Cross is involved, and there will be other exercises in Trondheim. So now you are already on board on this. Yeah, welcome.
Well done. Good.
Party.
You know, I just say quickly to this consortium, it's not my consortium, but Link certainly knows how hard it is to do these projects. So really congratulations. I think you should congratulate yourself after 3 years of hard work and 3.5 years and really having to deal with this one for that whole period. No, I think really it's commendable. So I think thanks for letting us be part of it. And yeah, really congratulations. Good job. It's a really nice outcome. So.
And I would also like to thank Matthieu and Martina for keeping us on our toes and making sure we reach the finish line. Thank you so much. I know it's not always easy, but people forgetting and not have the time and trying to reach the deadlines. Yeah, of course. But now, thank you, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to say the consortium was not the hardest. You know, I think it was good people in this consortium, so it made my life a bit easier. So thank you. I would really like to thank, so first of all the people who came in that panel, all the people who came in that event today, partners and especially our kickoff. This makes a difference between a nice event and a boring event. So thank you for making it nice and very interesting. Many thanks to Ina, to Alexandra, to Hélène, and Alexis. Yeah. Thank you very much for putting that together in a very short time. Usually this is something you plan over many months. We did it in a month, I think, or something like that, a month and a half. So many thanks to the Brussels video crew. Yes. He was extremely smooth, I have to say. So for the, apart from our mistakes sometimes, but he was very, very good. For example, so this is very good, and this is a great space, I think, for those who, like us in European projects, come to Brussels. This is a good address to keep in mind, I think. So yeah, once again, many thanks to all of you, and I agree. Let's take a picture.